Yesterday, during the AI and education panel here at Convergence, Sir Anthony Seldon said that the only thing that Demis Hassabis may have got wrong is that it will probably be even faster and more impactful. This is not a distant or hypothetical future. A revolution is underway, one that permeates all aspects of our life. As we've heard, not only in the AI and education panel, but across many discussions throughout this edition of Convergence, we cannot rely solely on governments, policies, or external institutions to navigate the challenges and the opportunities of what lies ahead. How we choose to engage with this transformation and the role each of us plays in shaping it truly matters.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Matthew Harvey Sanders. We are grateful that you're joining us from South Africa this afternoon, having tried to be with us here in person this afternoon. Matthew is a former infantry officer and seminarian. He is the founder and CEO of Longbeard. Longbeard's flagship product, Magisterium AI, is the world's leading Catholic answer engine, serving users in over 165 countries. The company also developed Vulgate AI, an advanced library platform powering historic digitization project with the Pontifical Universities in Rome. Later this year, the company will release Ephraim, the world's first trained Catholic AI. Matthew is recognized as a thought leader in Catholic AI, having been featured in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and regularly participating in podcasts and delivering keynotes at AI events. Matthew founded the Builders AI Forum, which convenes annually in Rome to advance the development and scaling of Catholic AI globally. Turning to Davide Corte is a technical program manager who spent the past decade building and delivering data and AI-adjacent enterprise platforms. He is passionate about the human challenges and opportunities arising from AI and technology, and how these can be harnessed for the benefit of individuals and society. My name is Karen Singaraya, and I work as a GP. I'm a Vice Chancellor of the Catholic Union of Great Britain and have organised several events and talks, including a panel discussion with Matthew Harvey Sanders on AI, faith and ethics. Thank you.
Matthew, thank you for being with us today. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. So let me kick off the dialogue with the first question. So over the past 3 years, AI has become definitely a key focus of attention and debates and large-scale investments. However, when we hear about AI in practice, it's often through stories of people either needing professional therapy and consulting AI instead, or children chatting with AI rather than friends, or even in some cases, children developing intimate relationships with chatbots, leading to tragic consequences. So we'd like to ask you, what are some of the key challenges and misconceptions that you think are at the root of this?
Starting off with an easy one, I see. Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would probably would like to encourage people to think more about is this is unlike any past technological or civilizational shift we've had in the past. Sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, this is just a kind of a next industrial revolution," and some jobs will be lost, but more will be created, and we'll adapt, and I think certainly that's true that we will adapt, but I certainly don't think that this is the same as the Industrial Revolution. I mean, as you noted, Demis Hassabis is saying the ground we're going to make in the next 10 years is completely unprecedented in human history. And in large part, this comes down, to the fact that these machines can think. I say that in quotation marks. They can think. They can reason, and to some extent, and they can know. And that's, of course, presents one of the big challenges, is that they're able to kind of work alongside us or substitute for real human relationships, especially for people who may find it difficult. to make human attachments. And I think more than anything else, aside from the fact that this is a very different kind of revolution that we're kind of experiencing, or evolution, depending on how you look at it. The other thing I would note is I think a lot of the angst that as basically being noted now, people, that need to see psychologists to kind of think about the disruptions that are happening because they're afraid of how this will play out. People worried about losing their jobs. Obviously, we've gone through, these are trappings that always come with major civilizational changes, I think. But I think one thing in particular is a concern to me that I don't think is getting enough attention is because we have our generation or two that kind of grew up in the internet age, and particularly with Gen Z, we're having a generation that doesn't have the same kind of social skills or kind of the religious or faith grounding that previous generations have had, something that kind of stabilized them through this massive transition. And that, of course, worries me because if people lack the social skills necessary to build strong human attachments, develop strong relationships, and they don't have kind of a existential grounding to know why, the sense of kind of dignity and sense of purpose, then ultimately when these questions, these existential questions kind of come up and emerge, and they're coming up, I think, a lot more frequently because of how AI and robotics is changing the world. I think a lot of them just feel ill-equipped to deal with these things. And so they end up talking to bots as opposed to working through them with other human beings, or developing relational connections with bots as opposed to relational connections with other human beings. If you want a good example of this, look at Japan, which has a state-sponsored courting program, because the young people are having a difficult time talking to each other and forming relationships. And so I think why I think a lot of people who are kind of, especially the sociologists, are concerned about this next trajectory is that we just, especially younger generations, are just not equipped, I think, to manage in the way we were in the past. And so I think that is a genuine reason for concern. And of course, this technology is different in kind.
Thank you. So you mentioned that, Matthew, a little bit about the challenge of people's experience about the fear of job displacement. We keep hearing in the news about large-scale redundancies associated with AI that are already occurring and expected to accelerate. So I'd like to ask a question in two parts. Part one, given the ever more rapid developments of AI, its increasing ability to handle even intellectual labor, should we expect, relatively in the short to medium term, that almost every job may be replaced by AI? And part two, if that is so, given work is a fundamental expression of human dignity, should we have safeguards to defend ourselves from these undermining effects of AI? Or do you foresee a different role for the manifestation of work in the lived experience of the human person?
Well, I don't expect. I mean, there's always job displacement, right? I mean, that's something that we just come adjusted to. I think that the scale of job displacement is going to continue to increase. I don't necessarily think that means that there'll be less jobs in the short term. Well, there certainly will be in certain sectors. I mean, so for instance, there was a chart that came out recently. It wasn't that old, but basically it was kind of plotting job postings on Indeed for developer positions. And when ChatGPT kind of started dropping, we started seeing these job postings start tanking. And this was as of 2025. And then recently, it went from basically there was virtually none being posted to increasing exponentially. This was very peculiar because given that AI excels in particularly in verifiable domains like STEM fields, we were expecting that as AI continued to get more and more capable, there'd be less need for these junior developers. And but as it turned out, the demand increased, and so that's kind of exciting. But there's a catch. One of the reasons why people are hiring so many developers is because they're using them to help automate other jobs away. So yes, there's more developers being hired, but you're going to start to see more displacement. And so if you think of a Fortune 500 company, there are developers coming to figure out how to automate away everyone else's job functions, because obviously that's more cost effective, right, in the longer term. So I think in the short term there'll be disruption. In the medium to long term, when we start, especially when we take into account robots, because we're not just talking about disembodied AIs which can do knowledge work. We're talking about robots which in a few years will start manufacturing at scale, which have these these incredible minds around them, and then they'll start displacing blue collar work in ways we've never seen before. And so that's why I say that this transition is unprecedented in kind, because we have both knowledge work and we have blue collar work facing massive disruption. Medium to long term, I agree with Elon and others that I think work will, for the most part, be optional. Now, I don't want to say that just because the GDP economy doesn't need human beings to work, that people won't have work to do. I think just because, well, people have more time on their hands and maybe the GDP economy doesn't need them, doesn't mean that they can't find things to do. I think that there is an opportunity ahead of us where people can actually have the time to finally discern who they are, why they were made, what their actual gifts are, and then they get an opportunity to actually cultivate those gifts and decide they want to put them to work just because it brings them joy and brings them peace. And I think what we'll find is that there actually will be a market for goods and services which are made by other humans. We jokingly call this the Etsy economy. And people, despite maybe potentially universal high income, people will choose to end up paying more for goods and services that are by humans because they want the human connection. So the AI and robotics may be producing these goods and services at a very cheap rate, which is good because that should help raise a lot of people out of poverty. But that also provides us the opportunity to that'll increase demand for human goods and services as well. So I think things will fundamentally change, but there's going to be this transition period. And that's what I worry about, where the GDP economy is as fast as possibly can, trying to automate away as many human jobs as possible, so they can remain competitive and generate as much profit as possible. The bunch of people who have time on their hands, who lack the human intellectual and spiritual information to know how to use that time properly. And then we may start seeing a lot more social and spiritual disruption. We call it the potential of the existential cliff, where people are locked inside condominiums in downtown with nothing to do on their time, with their time, and they end up using that time in ways that isn't constructive or conducive to human flourishing, and that could lead to a lot of people going kind of right off that cliff. So I think there's an enormous challenge for the church and other organizations which are interested in helping facilitate human flourishing to take stock of where we're at now, where we're likely to be in 2 and 5, 10 years, and start really trying to focus on solving this particular problem.
Thank you. You've articulated that AI is not only a threat. In the medical field, we see instances of AI assisting humans in diagnosis. From a human perspective, could you briefly elaborate on the main opportunities of AI with a particular focus on practical examples?
I mean, sure. I mean, if you look at DeepMind, right? Based in London. What Demis Haspis is doing there, we all heard about protein folding. Now he's trying to create a virtual cell, which if he succeeds, it's an enormous undertaking. But if he succeeds, this will accelerate drug development. I mean, orders of magnitude. I mean, there's the real possibility, I think, of actually curing disease. There are people who are excited about it for life extension, and now some of us may be a little bit concerned about that, for especially if there's transhumanist vibes. But I think, if nothing else, what that kind of life extension movement is doing is it's trying to figure out ways that we can kind of live healthier lives, and again figure out ways to kind of crack chronic disease. In large part, which a lot of that's just lifestyle, right? So we can figure out what the optimal lifestyle is in order to prevent chronic disease. That's certainly going to make the job of curing it a lot easier. I mean, we talk about kind of universalizing access to high quality, healthcare. Elon is famous for saying that he thinks, Optimus, in a year or so, will have. I mean, right now, what he's doing with Optimus, which is the robot they're building, is absolutely incredible. The hand they're building as almost almost the number of degrees of freedom as the actual human hand, which is an enormous technical accomplishment. You think about what this human hand allows people to do in the medical field. Just think of all those surgeries. If you have an AI which has advanced medical understanding, and it has access to a hand which is as technically capable as our own, think about how you could produce these robots to scale and scale high quality healthcare around the world. I mean, it's incredible. So I think as long as we understand, I mean, ultimately that this AI is a tool, and we have that kind of that mentality and approach, and I think all we have to be thinking about is, well, what are the biggest human problems that have plagued humanity, and how could these tools be used to solve them? And I think if we stay focused on those problems and applying AI in those areas, then I think we'll have a lot less reasons to existentially dread the future.
Thank you, Matthew. So we've seen that, human connection and sort of dialogue are two dimensions that are quite linked with convergence. And, in a world where, as Tolkien said, everyone is looking at Stalin and Hitler, we have, people here at Convergence, both in the audience and from speakers, from different backgrounds, and that are in dialogue and looking together toward the common good. And, given that, as we heard yesterday in the high-end education panel, but even in many discussions here at Convergence in this edition, we cannot solely rely on governments, policies, or external institutions to drive this AI transformation and revolution, but the role each person plays is essential. So what do you think the role of this dialogue is, and the role each person can play in this revolution?
Well, I think in large part, a lot of the most fiery disagreements we see today are basically because there's a lot of people who care about the most important problems in the world, and they want to solve them, right? So I think that's a good thing. I think one of the best ways, and this is fairness, pretty much common sense, one of the best ways to overcome disagreements or to overcome divergences and of opinion is I think through education. Generally, I do feel for the most part, a lot of disagreements are just based upon having access to different data sets or weighting different data sets differently. I think the more we understand the problems, the more we'll understand what data or what approaches are fundamentally the best ones, and it should make it easier for us to agree. And this is one of the reasons why I think AI and robotics is so exciting. In principle, as we continue to build this incredible data set of all the totality of all human knowledge, wisdom, and insight. It's one of the things we're doing at our own company, Dicastery AI, or Longbeard, I should say. We're trying to digitize everything the Catholic Church has ever said in its history, and effectively build a data set, and then make that effectively available to anyone in the world who wants to tap into it and make it useful for their lives, to apply that wisdom and insight in their day to day. And I think about what a massive unlock, that could be for over 1 billion people. And I think if we take everything we know about STEM, everything we know about history and everything else, and we train that into our models, and so every person has access to this expert, which can work with them, to help answer questions with proper grounding, and to help cultivate skills and help them develop their understanding of things, and also to play devil's advocate and help them to become aware of their own biases and to work through those. I think, and we can do this at a scale that's never been possible before. I think that's reason to be, very excited. And so I think for the most part, I think we just, again, what we need to do is just to agree that there are a lot of problems in the world that need to be solved. There are some that are more important than others. I think we can easily find agreement that those problems need to be solved. And I think if we focus and start tackling the things that we can do together instead of the things we can't, I think that will help us to build a greater solidarity, and we'll probably end up making more progress. Maybe the last point I'll say on this is I think I'm going to try not to be too political and things like that here, but I also think that if you look at the world today, there's a lot of angst because it seems like we're entering a new period of geopolitical instability, and I ask myself, why is that? And I think in large part, I think it's this scarcity mentality. We're in this middle of this AI race in which it's China and the US are basically competing, and it still seems to be this kind of zero-sum approach where either the US wins and Europe and Africa are on the US's platform, or China wins and Europe and Africa is on China's platform. And so we can't afford to lose this, which means we have to get AGI, which means we have to get artificial superintelligence as fast as we possibly can. We can't allow the other one to have an edge. And so even though we may know we're building these tools faster than we should, we're deploying them faster than we should, faster than what is safe, because we don't think we can lose, we have no choice. And so here we are. And that also means if we're going to win this race, it means that we have to have a massive energy supply. We have to have the ability to tap into fossil fuels. We need to be able to build energy infrastructure as fast as we can, because what good is having a whole bunch of chips and data centers if you don't have the power to power them? And so effectively, that means that we have to start making big, bold moves in the world to make sure that everyone's, that we have access to those reserves. And we were trying to break up alliances, which could end up benefiting our competitors. And I think so. A lot of these moves we're seeing right now are basically just to try to provide the greatest advantage as possible to one side or the other. And this deeply concerns me. Namely because I don't think the people were consulted when a lot of these decisions are made, or we even have any clue why these things are happening. So anyways, this is a long way of saying, more than anything else, I think what's important is literacy and education. The people need to know where the world's at now, and how it's going to change in 2, 5, 10 years, and the extent of that change. And they need to then understand these technologies, what they're capable of doing, and what they will be capable of doing, and we have to be very clear about what they shouldn't be doing. And we need to have a robust civil conversation. And then we need to make sure that we're letting our politicians know what we think is in the best interest of human flourishing from our own perspectives, and ensure that they're enacting policies that reflect what is ultimately in the interests of individual countries and collectively of humanity. What we don't want is a bunch of AI labs and a bunch of governments making these decisions in an ivory tower, and we're just kind of along for the ride. I just don't think that's going to play out well. So it's important that each one of us recognize that we have an important role to play in this. That we have to take the time to understand these things, and we have to get involved.
Thank you, Matthew. One aspect which I think is key is business models. So there seems to be a shift from attention economy to affection economy. So even, linking back to my first question about, the use of AI and how, in many cases, companies really optimize for profit. Do you see, potentially an alternative? Are there any, concrete examples that show feasible and valuable alternatives to these, profit-driven business models?
Not a lot. Not a lot. I mean, I like to think what we're doing would be one example. I mean, obviously we're a company, we have investors, we have to make a profit. But ultimately, what kind of drives us is we feel we're working to solve a very kind of real problem that we think ultimately will benefit a lot of people. If we can make wisdom and insight more universally available to people, we think net that's just going to help everybody. I think ultimately that the problems that are the most profitable to solve in a long horizon are the biggest problems, the problems that touch the most people. One thing that does give me hope is if you look at people like Demis at DeepMind, with Google's AI division, you look at people like Dario at Anthropic, even look at people like Elon, at XAI. They're trying to tackle some of the biggest problems in the world, like disease, like trying to universalize access to all human wisdom and insight. They're trying to build humanoid robots, right, that can interact in the world and lift the world out of poverty. These are big problems, and they're raising totally crazy amounts of capital to do it. And the investing community is getting behind them and trying to solve these audacious problems. So in the short term, yes, they are going to have to find a way to generate profits. Otherwise, their businesses are going to fail. I don't think that's net in the interest of anybody. But it seems like the investment community understands that the bigger problems are ultimately going to be the ones that make the most money, and they're willing to bet on these guys. And so I think we have to recognize that in the short term, there may be some decisions to chase profit that may seem like side quests, off ramps from the big problems. But I think if we take a real hard look at the problems that they're solving, they may not actually be as much a side quest as one may think. I mean, to give you a good example, so OpenAI made this controversial decision that they were going to allow basically a kind of erotica on ChatGPT would be able to interact with users and kind of have these erotic conversations. There's other platforms that allow that, and this was something that there was a lot of people who felt that was a bad decision. And ultimately, just recently, this past week, OpenAI decided not to go down that path, because ultimately the more profitable path for them is to compete with Anthropic and Claude in basically going after kind of coding and kind of enterprise use cases. And coding, if you the better you get it, that's kind of coding. This is usually an unlock to solving a lot of different problems, particularly in the area of STEM. But certainly when it comes to business, there's a lot to be had if you're able to effectively build a model that's really good at coding. And so in some ways, pursuing profit here, so going after building like an expert coder instead of erotica, this was a profit-driven decision, but ultimately I think it was a good decision for all of us. Now, it's not to say that they won't pivot back to that, but I think that there's time now for us to make it clear to the labs and remind them. And I think this is something that I think states and countries and stuff can do as well, is we want their attention focus. We want their models, we want the compute, and we want the energy directed at solving problems that we think are most important. And I think that they are receptive to that.
Thank you. So we want to, this is really a dialogue. So we want to involve everyone, who might have questions to participate. So, yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much for your talk. I wondered, could you comment on existential risk, that is, extinction threat from AI, and perhaps also gradual disempowerment scenarios, and how plausible you find these to be? And perhaps, well, I'm tempted to add a little bit more frame to that, but I'm interested to see what you have to say with that somewhat minimal framing of the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously something that I've been thinking about for almost like 10 years. I think like a lot of people, Hollywood's done a really good job of preparing us for a doomsday situation in which AI wakes up and considers us a threat because we're competing for finite resources and decides it needs to wipe us out. And I don't think that's necessarily unhelpful, but I wouldn't consider myself a doomer. I do think that people like Jan LeCun, I think the people who are leaders of the industry, who've made it clear that they think that AGI is not something that's going to be achieved internally by one lab, just like this. It's going to require contributions from labs all over the world, and these collaborations will be done to some extent in the open, and so we'll have a pretty good understanding of where AI capabilities are at, and therefore we should be able to effectively step in and mitigate them. This is kind of Jan's perspective. Obviously, the other perspective being, no, that's not entirely true. It is quite possible that a lab with enough resources could achieve AGI and therefore accelerate to ASI. And given that likely our regulators will not be able to keep up, the right regulation will not be in place, and boom, next thing you know, it wakes up and decides it needs to wipe us out, or some bad actors decide to use this super powerful AI to invent some kind of biological weapon to wipe us out. I think that all of those concerns are credible, but I think if we fixate on preventing that from happening too much, I think it's in some ways that could be a distraction from things, more plausible things that we actually can do. Like I was part of the pause movement when it first started, and I think there was a short window there when maybe it felt like it was possible. But we know now it's become clear, given how U.S. and China are not going to slow down because of this zero-sum game mentality, lobbying to slow down, or thinking we can pass regulation to force the labs to slow down. I just think is not plausible, which is one of the reasons why I think more than anything else, what we need to do is we need to make sure that civil society is more aware of what the current capabilities of technologies are and where these technological capabilities are likely, to take us, and to ensure that we're focusing the labs on the right problems, and that safety that the labs themselves need to ensure that what they're doing is safe. And I think most of the guys running these labs are good people. They have kids, and they don't want to build something that could end up threatening their futures. So I know that almost all the labs work pretty hard on safety. And I think what we need to do is try to encourage the research and safety teams at the individual labs to collaborate a little bit more in the open and ensure that whatever they're developing in order to keep their models on rails internally, which ultimately just leads to a better AI product, that they could kind of open source that or contribute that to some kind of commons so that all the labs could benefit from it. And so it's not just, one or two of the top labs which are effectively achieving safety, because obviously even an AI which is 6 to 8 months behind could do irreparable damage in the wrong hands. So anyways, long story short, I do think the doomsday thing is still something we should look very seriously at. I don't really see a practical way to slow things down, and so I think the best thing we can do is just ensure that as many people as possible are part of this conversation, and every kind of key step function or key milestone that we create towards AGI and ASI, that we're all aware and we all ensure that our voices are heard.
Thank you very much for that. May I ask a follow-up, or would you prefer just that this move on to another question?
No, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, what do you think of concerns like, instrumental convergence? Because you mentioned Jan LeCun and that he's not very worried, but I have looked at some of the conversations he's had with, say, Eliza Yudkowsky, who is one of the great AI pessimists. He recently published a book, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. And I've gotten the impression that LeCun mostly tends to just dismiss Yudkowsky-style arguments rather than to actually answer them. And I would also just mention that just a few days ago, I ran into some machine learning engineers and then subsequently had a conversation with some representatives of MATS, which is an organization that trains a lot of researchers to then go into AI safety organizations like AISI, AI Futures, and so on. And they've had a lot of churn with a lot of those labs. And I also had a discussion with people from two UK AI startups, Oxford Dynamics and Informatics. And in all these conversations, I discussed the possibility, could we transition in the next few years into a largely automatic economy with agentic AI and other advances, in which most productivity and most decisions are made by machines, and that quite apart from just the concern we might willingly cede control, that's very thinkable that when we have what amounts to an automatic economy in which agents are modifying themselves and are subjected to not just tremendous market competition, but what amounts to evolutionary pressure, that we could see an optimization for serving the goods and profits of the automatic economy, which is going to be much, much larger and much more profitable than serving human needs with the human sector of the economy, so that we could, without any kind of malevolent AI takeover scenario, just a bunch of venture capitalists telling their AIs, go and found a bunch of companies and make as much money as possible, we could still find ourselves in a scenario where, in effect, most of the economy is now in competition with human need. What do you have to say about that sort of scenario?
Democracy needs to prevail. I mean, I think more than anything else, having a very engaged and very well-informed citizenry is one of the ways that we can prevent a few actors from, especially very powerful ones, from using all their compute that they have to advance their own interests at the expense of everybody else. I generally tend to be pretty optimistic like this. I mean, I look at some of the most powerful people in the world. Let's just take people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. I mean, they're human beings. They care about, I think, how other human beings are doing. And although they have access to a lot of resources and therefore could buy up a large chunk of the world's compute and use it to advance their own interests, they don't seem to be doing that. I also think of the companies that actually create the compute. People like Jensen at NVIDIA. He does deliberately decide who he wishes to sell compute to. So I generally think as long as there's good human beings in charge of these companies who care about their futures, then I think that it's unlikely that we're going to see bad actors end up getting their hands on all the compute or all the power they need to wreck the world. I do think there'll always be enough good people who are pushing back. I'm not too worried about that. I do agree that in the future, a lot of the GDP economy will be automated. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, as long as human beings, when it comes to, are setting the agenda effectively. As long as we're the ones who are saying where we want this automated economy to be going, and what problems we want to be focused on. I don't necessarily think that's a problem. I think if nothing else, it should free us up from a lot of the toil. The whole paradigm is, I go to school, so I can get into a university, so I can get a job that'll make me enough money that I can pay a mortgage and put my kids through college, and so on and so on and so on. Where there's not a lot of time to really sit and reflect about who I am, why I matter, what do I feel like my actual gifts are, what do I want to give to the world. I think there'll be a lot more time for that. And so I think as long as the economy is providing the time and space for people to realize their full potential, to truly flourish, and I think that's primarily what we're using as our metric of success, that people are effectively flourishing as this economy develops, then I think we'll be okay. Large part, just more technical perspective, there's a general trajectory which I think is very positive, where I think we need to remove as much as we possibly can human data from training. So, and large part is because a lot of that data is just nonsense and noise. Another part of it is there's a lot of negative signal in it. And so one of the things I'm excited about is, and people like people like leaders in the AI and engineering space have kind of focused on how we need to be focused on this kind of cognitive core, right? So trying to build AI systems which effectively know how to learn from first principles, like we do, so they're not dependent upon all this human data, which can be messy and which can provide all kinds of signals, which is not healthy. If we remain dependent upon human data to train advanced models, I do get a little bit concerned, because there's a lot of nasty and terrible patterns in that data. And we don't want them to end up grasping or evolving with the wrong objective function. I think the more we can kind of ground them in reality, the more likely it is they're going to find some kind of harmony in the world, the same way I think nature does. Jan LeCun often uses the example of the difference between chimpanzees and orangutans. That chimpanzees are built like humans with this natural desire to kind of dominate. It's kind of encoded into them, whereas orangutans don't have that. Right. And I like to think that's one of the reasons why, and Musk and others said why it's so important that we train these AI systems to be curious and to not to be able to lie. We effectively want them to be curious and interested to see how human beings evolve and progress, as opposed to seeing us as some kind of competitor, which human data would provide a lot of signal for. So anyway, that's just another thing. I think as we make more progress in kind of with world models, and as we see robotics advance and AIs are able to kind of be able to learn from reality itself, I think we'll be able to dump a lot of the unhelpful data, and that will make AI even less of a risk.
All right, thank you very much. I'm still worried, but thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, for your sharing so far. I have two, well, not so little questions, but feel free to address them to the extent that you would like to. You mentioned OpenAI chose not to release Erotica, but decided to focus on coding problems instead, because it was, for instance, it was more of a profitable industry. I have a concern in that space that what if, more destructive industries would be more profitable, and the decision would not lead into that direction? And what can we do to optimize for purpose rather than for profit going forward that could benefit the common good and human flourishing? And the other part is you mentioned artificial general intelligence and ASI. I was wondering, how do you define this? As claiming that it's, for instance, 10 years down the line, around the corner, as there's this common critique that language models at this very moment reduce the intelligence, the concept of intelligence, to a very functionalist perspective, things that we can quantify for. And where do you see the limits of that definition of what is being spoken of as artificial general intelligence?
Sure. Great questions. Fortunately, there's not just one lab which is shipping frontier AI. There's multiple, and they're competing for market share. And thank God for that, because their brands matter to a large extent. If you want a good example of that, you probably heard when the Department of Defense basically blacklisted Anthropic, and they gave the contract to OpenAI. There was a massive backlash against OpenAI and ChatGPT. They had the highest record of downloads they've ever experienced, with people moving from OpenAI to Anthropic to show their support. So brand matters, and given what's at stake here, and given the competitiveness of the market, and the fact that the frontier models are all within, I would say, 3 to 6 months, and pretty relatively similar capability within 3 to 6 months. They can't afford to take product paths that ultimately could wreck their brands. And I think erotica and these other things, there's so many possibilities that they could. So I think that's again, a lot of that comes down to just ensuring that people are aware of what these companies are choosing to do, and we're making our voices heard. And that could be by saying, fine, you know what, you're going to do that, OpenAI, I'm done with you. I'm going to go with Anthropic. That's effectively, I think, one of the most effective ways that we can actually ensure that the labs stay in the right rails. There's also regulation. I mean, another thing the companies hate is when they go down a direction they shouldn't be, and then there's some kind of damage done societally, and then they get hauled up before a congressional hearing, and it's bad PR, and it feels like a waste of time. They spend a fortune on lawyers. And if they know that a certain direction they're going to go could end up resulting in that kind of situation, that they'll tend to want to avoid it if they can. Now, that's not to say that people won't build products or services on top of their APIs that will ultimately be destructive. And again, I think the only way to really win that war is just to ensure that people just are choosing not to use those products because they're just not ultimately in their interest. It won't help them to flourish, which is why it's so important that as much as possible, as many people as possible know what they need to flourish, and so they could choose not to use the products that will likely impede that flourishing, which is a much bigger challenge. So to me, the most pragmatic approach is just make sure that the buyers, the citizenry, are aware of what these companies are doing and are backing the companies that they feel are most aligned with humanity and human flourishing. As far as AGI and ASI, how do I define it? I tend to like the Demis Haspis kind of definition to this. So if we think of the human brain as a Turing machine, which is capable of computing anything that's computable, to me, AGI would be capable of the same thing. Right now, as we know, like AI's capabilities are very jagged, which means it can be exceptional. It can do like PhD research, in math and in some STEM fields. But when you get into matters of taste, it can perform, very, very bizarrely. So certainly, I don't think we've achieved AGI, and that's because we have this jagged intelligence. I think that there used to be this prevailing thinking that AGI would ultimately will be achieved by one singular model, and I don't know if that's really going to be the case. It seems more likely at this point that it could be a number of models with a particular harness or scaffold, which somehow reduces that jaggedness and allows it to be capable in across any domain. It seems to me like that's what an AGI system will ultimately look like, and I don't think we're too far away from that. I mean, I generally feel maybe within 2 years, maybe 3 years, we'll probably have a system which is capable of computing anything. It might be a very big system, a complicated system, but I think we probably will have those. And then, of course, once you have an AGI system, you can use an AGI system to help fast track your way to artificial superintelligence, right? And we're already seeing models. There's models coming up from Chinese labs like Minimax, which are self-improving right now. It's understood in the industry that Anthropic is using its own model to improve themselves with every edition that comes out. This is now normal. So I think we already are in a recursive self-improvement. It's just not as comprehensive, namely because we don't have the AGI yet. But I think that once we have those AGI systems, we'll see that recursive self-improvement level will really start to take off. And I don't think that's more than maybe a handful of years away.
Hello. To my understanding, at the moment, AI are really effective when it comes for technical tasks, but it's quite lackluster when it comes to any creative activities, to the point that there is even the derogatory term AI slop when it comes from drawing or writing, from fantasy or creativity. Do you think this is just an issue that could be solved in time with technological advancement, or that in general the true artistic creativity is something that could be always out of reach for artificial intelligence?
That's a great question. I mean, it's philosophical and also spiritual. I mean, I'm a Catholic, and I generally think, true beauty is a reflection of our Creator, as I do with inspiration. So, I believe, as far as I know, that still is mediated through human beings and couldn't be mediated through a machine. Maybe I'm wrong, and eventually we will have machines that get ensouled. But that's how I do think it, to some extent, in matters of taste. I do think the human beings play a very kind of unique role that I don't think machines will necessarily usurp. It's not to say that they won't be capable of generating incredible art, writing incredible symphonies and things. I think they will. I think that's certainly inevitable. We're already seeing pretty clear indications of that, right? I mean, in the most part, a lot of the creative fields can be realized through processes like interpolation, right? And extrapolation to some extent. But ultimately, I kind of feel like when it comes to taste making, even though a machine may be capable of generating symphony, the question is, will people value it in the same way they would if a human being made one that maybe wasn't as good, but they know that the human being was involved in it, and that human being may have in some ways been connected to the creator, and so therefore it's more meaningful. And so that's why I think in the future, we joke around about the GDP economy and the Etsy economy. I mean, no doubt, in the GDP economy, you'll be able to get any good and service, and I'm sure it'll be technically flawless, these goods and services that are delivered to us. But I still think there'll be a lot of demand in the Etsy economy for a chair, which maybe isn't technically flawless, but was made by a human being, and there's this kind of human connection to it. And so there's this question of taste and this humanness to it, and I think that's not something that AI will ever be able to take away. And so in some ways, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that what the outputs of human beings, which we think are technically brilliant or creatively unique and things like that, AIs will always be able to kind of replicate that, no doubt. But I still think there's still something unique about the fact that there is a human connection to the creative space, and therefore people will choose to value it simply because it has that human touch.
Thanks, Matthew. Father Toby here, you came on Radio Maria with me once, and great to hear from you.
I remember. Great. Hey, Father Toby.
Much to my surprise, when you mentioned the possibility of the eradication of disease, without wishing to sort of seem like the masochistic priest, I actually found myself thinking, is that actually desirable? And I wondered how much you'd thought about that, given that so much of the best of humanity seems to come through our response to the suffering of others in disease. Would that impulse actually naturally just land somewhere else in a good place, or would that actually be to our detriment? And in a similar way, when you spoke about the time that might be made that would liberate people, say for more leisure and a healthy pursuit of culture by the elimination of toil, is it not also the case potentially in a fallen world with a fallen humanity that toil becomes so much a part of the occasion of the growth in virtue? And what would be necessary for a life-giving, responsible use of AI would require levels of fortitude with regards to sort of perseverance in the difficult, and temperance with regards to not being a sort of a glutton and succumbing to the vice of curiositas, that actually, whilst in conception it's a great thing, in the reality of a fallen humanity it's not possible?
That's both great questions. Disease is a funny one, right? I mean, obviously we wouldn't wish disease on anybody, but we can also still be inspired by how people, are able to kind of experience disease and somehow find the grace to persevere through it. The lives of the saints are obviously they suffered a great deal, and that's one of the reasons why we find them inspiring. It's baffling to us that they found the inspiration, the the ability to kind of fight through the grit, and we see that is one of the great benefits of having that connection to God is he can make up for the areas in which you lack and help you persevere. That being said, I don't think that disease is a good thing, right? I don't think it's a good. I think it's part of reality, and we have to discover the grace to get through it, experience it, ask for the grace to get through it. And I think in a world where there is no disease, and let's say people hypothetically can live to 150 years old, that does present challenges because there isn't this risk of disease, and there isn't that example of others getting through it. There is the real risk of some kind of spiritual poverty, or this kind of sense that I am, and there's been a lot of shows that actually have played this out. I'm thinking of one called Altered Carbon, where you have people that are living like 150 years, but they just seem depraved. That they're chasing pleasure and it's never enough, and so they're always upping the ante, and they become quite twisted. So I think if we do not have the right human, intellectual, and spiritual formation for every individual, there's a real risk that with the elimination of disease and these long lives, that we're just going to go right off of a cliff. And this is why I just think fundamentally, this is why the church has to succeed in its evangelization mission. It just comes down to that. If people do not have that human, intellectual, and spiritual formation, if they don't have a good reason to choose the good, and to choose the path that is most likely to lead to their flourishing, which Catholics believe is being Catholic and having a relationship with Christ, I think we're going to be in big trouble. There's going to be a lot of people who are despairing. So that would be some of my answer to the first one. As far as the second one, I think just because robots and AI, in principle, if you look at the movie like WALL-E, could create a world in which we just sit around in front of screens and just, or VR or whatever else, and we just look for gaming experiences, and we're just looking for dopamine all day. It's quite, it's definitely plausible that AI and robots could deliver a world like that, where all of our Maslow needs are taken care of, and so we just choose to opt out of this world because we have nothing to contribute. We don't value other people highly enough, and we just want to, have fun. But we all know how that's going to end, and it wouldn't ultimately be in the interest of humanity. So this is where I think it's the same way with a parent. Just because, let's say that you're a parent who has a housekeeper, just because you have a housekeeper who can clean up around the house and do your son's chores doesn't mean that your son shouldn't do the chores. And I think that what's going to end up happening in the future is, as a species, we're just going to have to intentionally say, in order for a human being to flourish, there are some things, some pain, some suffering, some toil that are good, and that people are gonna have to accept and work through, because it will help them to flourish, even though they could opt out of that. And I think if people are sold on that, if they're able to see and properly understand that if I put in this hard work, I will ultimately be happier. Because look at all these other happy people who have gone through it, and look how meaningful their lives are, and look how strong their communities are. And so I see why it's worth it. And so yes, I will choose to put myself through this toil. I think if they see that there's a payoff there and it's ultimately worth it, then they will be willing to make those sacrifices and put in the time and energy. In the same way, like when I was in the Army, I did not like being trained to be an infantry officer. It was awful. The stuff that I had experienced, I would never do it again. You couldn't pay me to go and do it again. But do I think that it was a mistake, that it wasn't necessary? No, it was. And I did come out a better person in the end. And because I met officers who had been through it before, and I respect it, I realized there's probably something to it, and so therefore I should put the time and energy into it. So I think a lot of this, again, comes down to formation. And if we have people, if we have the church, which is doing its job, we have parents that are doing its job, we have communities that are doing its jobs, we'll make sure that we raise that generation, which doesn't seek to escape toil, but recognizes it has an important function in ensuring that we become the people we're meant to be.
We have time for one more.
Thank you, Matthew. You mentioned that you're speaking from South Africa, and I wondered what your thoughts might be in terms of the future divide of AI. And here I mean specifically, not so much in terms of consumption, but in terms of the production side and shaping where AI is going. And by AI divide, if you could focus your comments on, say, suites of countries across Africa where maybe people don't have as much opportunity to participate in shaping it and so on. What might the future look like, let's say, in 50 years, if that happens?
I'm incredibly bullish on Africa's trajectory. Even if you take just a practical example, take Starlink, which is Elon Musk's internet system, the satellites he has across. Starlink is now available in like 2/3 of African countries. This is totally wild. That now anybody, anywhere, really, in most of Africa, can get a high-speed internet connection. I mean, this was like a major infrastructure challenge in the past, and boom, that one's solved. And you think about, what does that mean? Now they have access to the internet, a free internet. That means they can get access to knowledge, right? They can get access to training, especially in the AI and robotics age. You can engage in engage in AI to kind of tutor you in really any field, right? To become kind of almost a master in it. Maybe not quite yet, but soon. So I think the future is really encouraging. Now, there is still a problem, which is we're limited. The ability to leverage AI comes down to a few things, right? How good your models are, how much compute you have, and how much power you have to basically power that compute. The power and the compute stuff it's really, really hard to effectively achieve that. And so there is a real risk that countries in Africa and other places in the developing world will not be able to build sovereign AI, to build their own AI infrastructure and train models which are uniquely trained to capture their culture and will work most effectively and optimally for their communities. That's a problem. That's a big problem. But the good news is there's a lot of people talking about this problem. I know some of the biggest companies in the world that are building data centers are looking very much at how do they actually scale them into Africa. And as we're pointing AI at problems like how do we create greater energy abundance, there's a possibility that we'll make a lot of progress in that, and we'll find ways to leverage things like solar and other things so that we can actually power data centers. They don't have to be massive, gigawatt clusters. In order to allow people to take advantage of sovereign AI. So I think that there are challenges. I do think they will be overcome. I do think as we move further into the AI and robotics age, goods and services will continue to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and therefore more and more people will be able to use them to level themselves up. Obviously, there's tons of brilliant people in Africa. There's tons of brilliant people in Southeast Asia. And the more that we equip them with the tools to realize their full potential, the more that they're going to contribute to the economy, and that's going to trickle down and I think benefit everybody. So I think the big thing here is make, again, as citizens, that we make it known to the companies, and that may mean deciding that we're going to support one company over another, right? Because that company has made it clear that they're committed to supporting sovereign AI initiatives in the developing world. And so therefore I will choose to pay for a subscription to that company because I support that company and their ultimate vision. These kind of decisions, they may not seem like a lot, but at scale, they can actually have enormous impacts on how AI develops. And I think that's why every individual has an important role to play in this.
Thank you, Matthew. In the interest of time, briefly, could I ask you about social peripheries? And it seems to me with the advancement of AI, it's mainly functions that the left hemisphere of the brain, analytics knowledge is what is developing at a huge pace. And yet things that are creative are more sort of from the right hemisphere of the brain. And can you foresee a time where there may be pockets of people, groups where they are developing on that front, as opposed to people who are relying more on knowledge and analytics are losing those functions, which are ultimately the ones that think about the bigger questions in life, faith, relationship. Do you see that as another downside?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I don't worry too much about it. I think when when there used to be office towers full of people who were just doing math all day, right? And then the calculator came out, and those people all of a sudden were displaced, and they had to find other things to do. But they just moved up the knowledge work ladder, right? They found more cognitively complicated tasks to work on. Now, I think there's obviously a downside. I'm not capable of doing advanced arithmetic in my head anymore, so I've lost that skill, and I don't think that's necessarily good. But I also doesn't keep me up at night either. I think ultimately when we're looking at these these challenges, I think it's important to look at, listen, what are we ultimately trying to do as a civilization, right? I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure as much as we possibly can that we're building a civilization in which the maximum amount of people are able to flourish, to realize their full potential. And realizing one's full potential means that you have to develop in a balanced way. Hence the importance of human, intellectual, and spiritual formation. You know, it's not healthy for me to only develop the left side of my brain and just ignore the right side. It has no value. And I think in a world where survival has been the paradigm for so long, where it's felt like the only thing that the world values me for is the left side of my brain, so that's what I'm going to focus and I'm going to cultivate. That's a problem, which is one of the reasons why I'm very happy that we're moving out of this economic paradigm. I do not think it's been healthy. And I think in the future, when we're not worried so much about survival, when our Maslow needs are basically taken care of, if people have the right incentives to develop both parts of the brain, then they can choose to develop them. And they'll have all the tools and the knowledge and the resources necessary to do that. And so I think people that naturally, you know, and again, part of this comes down to discerning who am I, what do I feel like my unique God-given gifts are, and then having the time and energy to then cultivate them. That may mean some people decide that, you know, the creative trajectory is better for them, and others will want to continue to be involved in STEM and working with AIs to, you know, on breakthroughs and things like that, or just even using their left brain, even to work in their communities to solve very practical problems. I think it's important to note that in the future, I think we will probably have a lot more intentional communities where families and things come together because they want to be in community. And I think they'll be able to intentionally decide how much they want AI and robotics to be part of that community. You know, just because I could have a robot, you know, looking after my garden for me, doesn't mean I necessarily want to. I may decide that I get a lot of joy and peace from that. And so I think a lot of it's just figuring out what are my needs, what are the needs of the community, in what ways do we think AI and robots can play a role in helping this community flourish, and then we make sure that they're incorporated just as much as is necessary. And for those communities that you know that prefer to do the Mennonite track and don't think they're necessary at all, and that's what they feel is optimal for human flourishing, then they should have every right to do that. But I think ultimately it really just comes down to human, intellectual, and spiritual formation, making sure that people are armed with everything that they need to know in order to ensure that they can make the right choices and flourish.
Thank you very much, Matthew. As much as we would like the conversation to continue, we have another session coming up in 5-10 minutes. So I would like to thank you, first of all, you very much for being with us today. And thank you also all the people who attended and who asked questions. And Maria.
Thank you very much, David and Karen and Matthew for this very thought-provoking dialogue. And so now we'll start like a 3